Get out here now! My wife's shouts jarred me from my tomatoes as I was staking up the vines. I rushed outside to find Renata standing stiff, arms crossed, glaring towards our front yard. What's going on? I asked. She thrust her finger. That's what's going on. I followed to see a dark blue sedan parked smack in the middle of our front lawn, back left tire crushing Renata's lovingly tended marigolds. My fists clenched. We live far out, nearly a mile from our closest neighbor. Our little cottage sits tucked amongst sprawling gardens that have become Renata's pride and my quiet joy over a decade of cultivation. To find this vehicle intruding and despoiling our sanctuary, I strode towards the car, Renata on my heels. No driver appeared as we circled it warily. The windows were tinted dark, and something about its implacable presence raised my hackles. Renata trembled with fury beside me. The nerve! Parking here without permission, crushing my flowers. We'll sort this out, I assured, laying a steadying hand on her shoulder even as I seethed inside. We left a stern note on the windshield and continued our day, both rattled. The next morning we were dismayed to find not only the sedan still occupying our lawn, but a white minivan parked beside it. Unbelievable, Renata cried. It's like they're mocking us. As the days passed, more vehicles arrived to crowd our property. Sedans, trucks, vans packed our lawn and the lane leading to our cottage. They drove recklessly fast, crushing Renata's gardens and rutting tire tracks into my vegetable patches. We left notes, pleaded to invisible drivers, called the sheriff to no avail. Finally, exasperated, I planted myself behind our ruined carrot beds one morning and waited. Around noon, a slick black luxury car came bumping up the lane. A tall woman with short, no-nonsense hair climbed out, surveying my gardens with a critical eye. I stormed over. Excuse me, but why are your cars parked on my land? My voice shook with bottled frustration. She glanced at me coolly. This is Flitwick Company property now. I'm the regional manager, Jordan Flitwick. We've claimed this area for employee parking. Claimed? I repeated in disbelief. This is my private property. You can't just claim it. Jordan smiled without humor. Actually, we can. Our parent corporation has expanding parking needs which supersede yours. Progress demands sacrifice. My vision hazed red. Through gritted teeth, I growled, You need to remove these vehicles immediately. You are ruining our home. Jordan shrugged, utterly indifferent. Your little garden hardly compares to our corporate necessities. I'm sure you understand. With that, she dismissively headed back to her car, crunching more vegetable shoots under her heels. I stood shaking amongst the rutted remains of my squash vines as Jordan tore away without another glance. By the time I stomped inside, I vibrated with rage. One look at my thunderous expression and Renata blanched. What happened? In terse words, I relayed the confrontation. Renata listened, face modeling darker with each sentence until she matched me in livid complexion. How dare she? Renata burst out when I finished. She can't just seize our land. I won't allow it. I regarded my wife, normally so cheerful with her flowers and herbs, but her eyes now snapped with ferocious purpose. Grim determination welled within me, reflecting Renata's defiant glare. If this Flitwick Corporation thought they could simply annex our home, they had no concept of the resolve they now faced. You're right, I bit out. This isn't just about parking spots now, it's about defending what's ours. I thumped my fist against the counter. Somehow, we make them pay. Over the next few days, the parking invasion accelerated. Sedans, trucks, and vans crammed along our lane and sprawled across our lawn in haphazard angles. They left glass and garbage in their wake that I warily picked up each morning. Our cottage, once secluded, saw employees traipsing past at all hours, trotting Renata's mangled flowers under their hurried feet. We placed angry calls to the sheriff and Jordan Flitwick. The sheriff sympathized but claimed powerlessness without evidence of actual crime. Jordan remained utterly indifferent to our complaints. Be reasonable, she dismissed when I described her employees destroying Renata's decade of cultivation. The company generously allows spillover parking for local convenience. Any minor garden damages are merely accidental. I grit my teeth at her blatant lies. Does minor damages include full-size tire ruts carved through my vegetable beds? As I've said, progress necessitates small sacrifices, Jordan replied breezily. Our parking needs take priority over some hobby gardening. The line clicked dead before I sputtered out a retort. Furious, I recounted the exchange to Renata, whose complexion modeled darker than my eggplants. Wordlessly, she marched outside, emerging minutes later with an armload of broken flower pots and scattered seed packets. I followed her grim gaze to where yet another vehicle idled, back bumper crushing her herb planters against our cottage wall. "Enough!" Renata shouted, hurling the debris across the yard. "We can't let this continue." I rarely saw my normally cheerful wife so angry. Her visage hardened with outrage and purpose. Rallying my own frustration, I nodded. "You're absolutely right. We need evidence if the sheriff will act. Let's install cameras, discreetly." The next morning, we positioned tiny surveillance cameras around the property. Almost immediately, they began recording the ongoing invasion, enduring shots of oblivious employees trampling gardens, driving recklessly, dumping trash and cigarette butts. That first-day footage even captured brazen vandalism as two snickering men deliberately snapped Renata's trellises, heavy with ripening pole beans. Reviewing the damning videos with Renata that evening, we seethed with impotent fury. "Look at them!" Renata jabbed at the screen. "They think they can just wreck whatever they want with no consequences." I regarded my wife's normally gentle features now taut with outrage, reflecting my own indignation. This transgression far exceeded damaged vegetation or property dispute. Our very way of life, the pastoral refuge we had lovingly nurtured, hung under existential threat from Jordan Flitwick's indifferent corporate boot. What recourse did two simple gardeners have against an encroaching conglomerate trampling cherished ground with neither permits nor permissions? I felt suddenly old and tired, clinging to a lifestyle being forcibly wrested away. With effort, I rallied my resolve. "We'll keep documenting their trespassing. There must be some accountability we can leverage." Renata nodded, jaw set. "We can't let them win. Our home and gardens are worth fighting for." The next week brought no respite from the encroaching horde of cars and employees. If anything, our property became more congested by the day, with vehicles crammed wheel to wheel, choking our cottage in on all sides. My bean trellises collapsed completely under regular trampling, while Renata's herbs and sprouts were ground relentlessly into the dirt. We escalated to daily calls to Jordan Flitwick, who breezily dismissed each complaint. "As I've repeatedly informed you, the company legitimately utilizes available land resources for parking overflow. Any garden disruption is purely incidental." "Incidental?" I practically shouted over the phone. "Your employees are openly vandalizing our cottage. Just yesterday, someone spray-painted our front door." "Alleged vandalism is hardly my concern," Jordan replied coolly. "I suggest you secure your property if you have issues." With that, she hung up once again. I relayed the useless exchange to Renata through gritted teeth. She listened silently, fists tight at her sides and rage smoldering in her eyes. The final indignity came at the week's end when I emerged one morning to find our quaint wooden welcome sign vandalized almost beyond recognition. What had once read "Declan and Renata's Country Cottage" now dripped with black paint, obliterating our names under the scrawled moniker, "Employee Lot D." Renata joined my side, crying out at the destruction. Then her gaze narrowed, focusing on two smug employees observing our distress from alongside a battered hatchback. They pointed mockingly, tapping ash off their cigarettes onto the paint-stained planks at our feet. Before I could react, Renata stormed forward, eyes blazing. "How dare you? Do you vile people have no common decency at all?" One man shrugged, smirking. "Hey, lady, not our fault you built a tacky cottage on company land," his companion snorted. "Should have known parking takes priority over petunias and vegetables. Too bad for your cute little gardens." They laughed derisively while grinding out their cigarettes onto our sign's charred remnants. Renata stood speechless with outrage as they ambled off, still chuckling. My wife's voice shook with fury. "They won't quit until they've poisoned everything, will they?" Grimly, I regarded ravished surroundings that had deteriorated daily under Jordan Flitwick's corporate siege. It suddenly crystallized that appeasing these vandals was not just impractical, but utterly impossible. "Enough," I burst out. "I'm finding Jordan right now and forcing accountability for this. She can't ignore such blatant destruction." I suited action to my words, striding back inside. Moments later, I returned triumphantly, waving a business card. "Got her personal cell. Apparently her golf buddy Harrison is good friends with the Flitwick CEO." I smacked the card against my palm. Let's ensure Miss Regional Manager fully understands exactly who she's dealing with now. Renata nodded with quiet intensity. As I grabbed my phone, my wife pierced me with her gaze. Make sure Jordan knows that this isn't just about parking anymore. For us, her employees' vandalism and disrespect represent an existential threat to our cherished way of life. We absolutely will not yield our carefully cultivated property or dignity quietly into the night. I stepped outside with Jordan's number, queued up, prepared to unleash hellfire for the continual desecration of our property. Before I could connect, another vehicle came bouncing down the lane, weaving between haplessly parked cars before skidding to a stop, partly on my potato bed. 2 more employees exited, laughing raucously and letting both doors swing out heedlessly into the surrounding vehicles. My finger stabbed the call button. When Jordan answered, I unleashed the pent-up frustration and fury of weeks' worth of documenting her employees' careless trespassing. I concluded my diatribe by shouting, "Your staff's outrageous disrespect and continual damage ends today, or I swear we will sue for everything your corporation is worth." Unfazed by my verbal assault, Jordan replied evenly, "While I understand this parking overflow may inconvenience your quaint lifestyle, all land usage has been approved by corporate lawyers. You have no legal grounds for complaints." I saw red. "Inconvenience? Your damned employees are openly mocking us while wantonly destroying property we've cultivated for years." "Alleged incidents on our legitimate land rights hardly warrant response," Jordan dismissed. "Now, if you've quite finished your little rant, I have real work to attend to." The line clicked dead again. I stood quivering for long moments until Renata touched my arm tentatively. "No luck with our polite appeals, then?" she asked with unsurprising resignation. I shook my head bitterly and relayed the useless exchange. We turned together to survey the cars now entirely choking our cottage from all angles like invasive weeds. Where could we possibly turn when the law itself favored corporate indifference over our helpless appeals? In that moment of despair, I wanted nothing more than to retreat inside our increasingly isolated refuge and shut out the hostile outside world. Only the solid determination still radiating from Renata kept me resolute. Suddenly decisive, Renata declared, "If pleading reason won't work, we'll just have to force accountability another way." Her brow creased with concentration. "What if we increased surveillance, captured every single trespassing vehicle and disruptive employee? Could cumulative documentation legally compel action?" Slowly I nodded, grasping her intent. "If we record every incident, cross-reference them to license plates and employee ID badges. Why, yes, I do believe repeated evidence would pose liability concerns even Flitwick lawyers couldn't shrug off." My spirit rallied with flaming purpose once more. "You're absolutely right. The time for politeness has passed. Let's install cameras across the entire property line. Make it impossible for those bastards to sneeze without being caught." I thumped my fist for emphasis. "We can't let them trample over us any longer. It's time to push back hard." Eyes blazing again, Renata gripped my hand tightly. "We'll beat them yet. No greedy corporation gets to demolish years of cultivation and memories so callously. This is still our land, and we will defend it." Over the next 2 weeks, we gathered damning evidence of the employees' continual trespassing and disrespectful behavior. The increased cameras captured countless incidents: vehicles tearing recklessly up on the lawn, crushing garden beds under their tires, employees trotting through the remnants of Renata's flower plots, leaving trash scattered amongst the wreckage, even multiple occasions of petty vandalism, like the 2 jerks deliberately backing over Renata's remaining herb planters along the cottage wall. We compiled the worst footage with vehicle IDs and employee badge numbers clearly visible, awaiting the moment we could slap Jordan Flitwick with irrefutable proof of her subordinates' misdeeds. The time came sooner than expected. I awoke one morning to find Renata already dressed, peering out the window with hands clenched tight at her sides. Wordlessly, she beckoned me over. I sucked in a sharp breath at the sight now greeting us outside. Our lovingly painted welcome sign lay face down in the dirt, split cleanly in half by what appeared to be axe chops. Scuffed trails showed it had been deliberately dragged there after the vicious demolition. As we rushed outside in dismay, a shiny sedan pulled up, The doors flung open and two impeccably dressed employees emerged, openly smirking at our distress. "Well, guess you don't need that old wreck anymore," one jeered, lighting a cigarette and regarding our vandalized sign with mock sorrow. "Don't worry, the company will replace it with something nicer. Employee Parking Lot D has a much better ring, don't you think?" His companion guffawed. "Think of it as a free upgrade. Lord knows this dump could use some modernizing." Their raucous laughter echoed across the yard as they ground out their cigarettes onto the sign remnants. Renata strode forward, fairly shaking with rage. "How could you monsters feel so entitled to destroy anything you please? Have you no basic human decency at all?" The first man shrugged. "Hey, it's just a chunk of wood. Don't get so worked up over stupid stuff. You gotta move with the times, lady." With a last derisive look around our cottage, they climbed back into their car. As they peeled off across the lawn, the remaining sign piece caught under a tire and exploded into shards. Their fading laughter left nothing but heavy silence in their wake. I wrapped one arm around Renata as she trembled with helpless fury. Hot tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why?" she choked out finally. "How can they keep escalating like this? Why won't Jordan stop them?" Bile rose in my throat as I surveyed our demolished sign, the meaningless destruction somehow encapsulating deeper ruination. I cleared my throat. Because for them, this isn't about parking spots anymore. It stopped being about that long ago. Destroying our cottage piece by piece is just petty fun to these bored corporate monsters. I met Renata's tear-filled eyes, but we won't let them win. The footage we've gathered should be enough now to force accountability. One way or another, we will make this stop. Renata scrubbed the tears away, mouth setting in a determined line. She nodded firmly. "You're absolutely right. Enough feeling sorry for ourselves. It's time for action." I straightened my shoulders, rallying resolve once more. "Let's make some calls. Time for Jordan Flitwick to directly answer for her team's misconduct." The next morning I called Jordan Flitwick. When she dismissively began her usual litany about necessary parking overflow, I cut her off mid-sentence. "Stop. This isn't a courtesy call. After months enduring your employees' disrespect and outright vandalism, I'm taking legal action. However, I'm offering you one last opportunity to avoid a lawsuit." For a long moment, only stunned silence answered. Finally, Jordan replied with forced calmness, "I believe you wildly overstate the supposed situation, but very well, let us meet this afternoon to address your concerns." I could hear the sneer underneath her measured words. 3 p.m. We have extensive documentation itemizing every single trespass and destruction perpetrated by your team. I sincerely hope you now understand exactly what reckonings you face. I hung up on her sputtering reply. Renata paced as I recounted the conversation. Her mouth twisted bitterly. "So after all this time dismissing our complaints, now Miss Regional Manager scurries to discuss resolution?" I nodded grimly as Renata continued. "She needs to recognize our evidence leaves no more room for excuses or politeness. We will receive accountability for this devastation, or her precious corporation pays dearly for willful negligence." At 3 p.m. we opened the door to find Jordan's imposing figure filling our doorway. I wordlessly ushered her inside, where manila folders covered our small dining table. Her nose wrinkled at the overgrowth visible through every window. I crossed my arms. "Surely all this mess exceeds even corporate guidelines?" Jordan pointedly ignored my jab, adjusting her suit jacket. "I assume you have prepared substantiations for these outrageous accusations?" Despite her dismissive words, tension permeated her posture. I allowed myself a small smile, sensing the shifted balance of power. In response, I opened a folder, sliding over a photo capturing a shiny sedan deliberately spinning mud ruts across Renata's flower plot. The license plate and employee ID badge clearly showed the driver grinning recklessly from behind the wheel. I steepled my fingers. "This seems an obvious example of deliberate destruction, wouldn't you agree?" Jordan blanched. I watched realization first dawn, then spread across her face as she grasped her own vulnerability. My grin widened at her growing unease. For once, we now dictated terms, while Jordan confronted her worst nightmare. Irrefutable evidence itemizing her employees' federal crimes. Renata smoothly placed several more photos, showcasing ripped vegetation and tire tracks gouging holes throughout formerly pristine greenery. Her glare bore into Jordan's rapidly paling complexion. This documentation leaves no question about culpability or damages owed us. I calmly spun another photo across the table, depicting a pair of smug employees actively busting apart what remained of our wooden sign. And should local authorities view these willful destructions of private property, well, I raised one eyebrow meaningfully. Jordan sank into the chair behind her, all former smugness evaporated. The regional manager fumbled for empty threats against the damning proof arrayed before her. In that moment, I saw victory emerge from months of frustration. With mounting excitement, I leaned forward to press our long-awaited advantage home. I savored Jordan's dawning despair as her dismissive facade crumbled. Leaning back, I laced my hands behind my head. Well now, let's discuss our lawsuit's magnitude, shall we? The property damages alone likely exceed $500,000, and then pain and suffering compensation, of course, not to mention potential criminal charges. I let the implications hang menacingly. Jordan's pasty face now shone with perspiration. She licked her lips. Perhaps we could negotiate a discreet settlement arrangement? My corporation prefers avoiding negative publicity. I held up one hand, halting her panicked rambling. Here are my terms. Full financial restitutions for destroying decades of cultivated ground and vegetation. Secondly, immediate removal of all corporate vehicles from my private property, plus construction of a barricade to protect my land. And finally, I paused meaningfully, your letter of resignation as regional manager for gross professional negligence and misconduct. Jordan shot upright, cheeks mottling with outrage. Now see here, those demands are outrageous. I will certainly not resign over some preposterous gardening complaint. Why, I have half a mind to countersue for extortion. I regarded her evenly across the table, then pulled one last document from my folder. I spun the heavy parchment towards Jordan and sat back, steepling my fingers. What? Jordan trailed off weakly as the elaborate filigree header swam into focus. She paled further until her face shone ghostly against her dark jacket. With a trembling hand, she turned the thick cardstock around, revealing an ornate calligraphy inscription. The Peterson Family Trust Board of Executives requests the honor of your presence. Below this, a handwritten note stood out sharply. Declan, I took the liberty of updating your outdated business cards. Let's golf Sunday. Harris Jordan's horrified gaze shot back up to meet my now openly gloating smile. You see, my old friend Harris holds controlling interest on the Peterson Trust Board, I explained breezily. They also represent Flitwick's single largest client, I believe. Why, if they severed ties, it could potentially sink your entire corporation. I paused to let fresh panic bloom across Jordan's face. So you see now why I'm confident we can resolve this situation to my complete satisfaction. I buffed my nails casually on my shirt. I prefer avoiding negative publicity as well, so let's keep this quiet, yes? You will provide everything outlined previously here. Slowly, Jordan sank back in her seat. She seemed to age a decade in seconds, her arrogant bluster entirely vanquished under threat of financial ruin. Her reply emerged choked and thin. You win, Declan. I apologize profusely for this entire calamity. You'll have your concessions by week's end. I nodded regally. Excellent. I'm so glad we avoided lawsuits. My friend Harris also sends his warmest regards. Unable to resist one final twist of the knife, I waved the Peterson embossed business card mockingly. Jordan merely moaned, dropping her face into her hands. True to her word, Jordan had all vehicles removed from our property the very next day. Their tire tracks remained embedded all across the lawn and vegetable patches, glaring reminders of the indignities suffered. But no more would uncaring employees traipse through, leaving trash scattered like confetti. Over the next week, landscapers arrived to erect a stately iron fence demarking our property line in no uncertain terms. Jordan emailed confirmation she had resigned from her regional manager position, though I noted she conveniently omitted exactly why. I decided against pushing the matter. The woman had clearly suffered sufficiently under threat of career implosion. A half-dozen gardeners commenced replanting the annihilated greenery. Renata directed them like generals deploying troops across a battlefield. In little time, fresh seedlings and saplings erased all lingering scar tissue until our cottage shone pristine once more, buffered by an imposing metal barrier against all future corporate incursions. The renovation's complete. I signed for a final delivery notice, a nondescript envelope I brought straight to where Renata contemplated the resurrected gardens. Silently, I passed her Jordan's letter of resignation, along with a typed corporate memorandum announcing a sizable gardening reparation settlement now deposited into our account. Renata read both documents without a word. Finally, she raised glistening eyes to mine. We did it somehow, stood against an relentless tide that threatened to wash away everything dear. Overcome, she embraced me fiercely amidst our reclaimed sanctuary. Later, as dusk fell, I wound my arm around Renata where we sat together on the porch step. A lone owl hooted somewhere as fireflies drifted lazily through the fresh night air. Our shoulders touched gently, two weathered soldiers basking in hard-won peace. Eventually, I broke the easy silence. Who could have predicted how fiercely we'd need to fight for our way of life? When did simple living get so threatened in this world? I shook my head sadly. Renata sighed into the gathering darkness. It's the way of things now, everything accelerating faster and faster. But we reminded Jordan there's still power in moving deliberately, tending beloved things with gentleness. She trailed off, contemplating new seedlings gifted sunlight and space to reach for the sky once more. A moth fluttered ecstatically amongst the timid shoots and buds destined to soon erupt into abundant fertility. Quiet joy warmed me then. Joy and mounting pride for my bold, beautiful wife who spearheaded thwarting the corporate attack on our shared slice of heaven through wit and grit. When she spoke again, fresh determination resonated through Renata's voice. Our stand remains important, however small. Never yield personal places of peace to indifference. Together we safeguard more than land. We model valuing dignity and care itself. She covered my hand with hers then. No more words needed spoken in the gathering dusk. Together we sat sentry, surveying newly hallowed grounds that called for nurturing hands and fierce, loving hearts to shelter them, thriving under stars wheeling slowly overhead.